Iya wakavhura mamai kwarumbwana soja love maakuzoti asha Hurricane Stanford Mabasa.
Okay, good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
Yeah, so.
Hey, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, I think we can start.
Yeah, sure.
Say, can we have a recap? Say.
Hello.
Tokumbroka recap.
Hello. Come again.
Tokumbroka recap. Say. Tokumbroka recap.
Munokumbira.
Recap your lecture.
Can you come again? I can't hear you properly.
Recap your lecture.
Oh, recap.
Yeah,
okay, I will do it at some point. But today I wanted to talk about plant minerals.
What are it?
Yes, I will come back to it in another session to probably revision. Now, what we want to talk about today is plant-mineral relations. We know that when plants grow they use their roots to take water and some plant minerals, which are used for various functions within the plant. You could be aware that farmers could be currently applying ammonium nitrate as top dressing. And we know ammonium nitrate contains nitrogen, which is essential for plant growth. Apart from nitrogen, there are other elements which are quite important for plant growth. So these are the plant minerals which we are going to talk about this afternoon. Here I'm showing a slide of maize. This maize is already tasting, but it's very short. It has got a poor growth. It's under sandy soils. Some of the reasons to account for such poor growth could be lack of essential plant minerals or nutrients. The maize on this slide is some purplish leaves, which could be an indication of nutrient deficient symptoms. Again, we have got maize displaying nutrient deficient symptoms. You can see the leaves are not that green. Another maize again with leaves which are almost dying. What you see here on this slide, on this young maize plant, is a phosphorus deficiency symptom. So if you see such plants with the purplish leaves, note that we could have a phosphorus deficient symptoms. This could be zinc symptoms, zinc deficiency, where we have these plants with the white patches. They are not that green. So plants require nutrients for growth. Probably the next question is, what are nutrients? A simple answer could be elements, which are actually mineral nutrients. And the second question could be, what are the elements which are required by these plants? For your own information, there are about 17 mineral elements required by plants, which is quite a lot. It used to be 16 elements before the discovery of nickel. Later on, it was found that nickel was also essential for plants. So if we add nickel to the 16, we now have about 17 elements. I'm sure you could be curious to want to know these elements. Here I have got a display of the periodic table, which is showing us the possible elements which you can find on Earth. What actually happens is that plants could uptake most of these elements on the periodic table, but only 17 are used for growth and the plant metabolism. The rest may not be used for biological processes. So although we have many elements on Earth represented by the periodic table, we will focus on only 17 of them. So basically, if we have elements like those represented by the periodic table, we can divide them into two groups. One, essential elements, and non-essential elements. We are not going to worry about non-essential elements. We will focus our minds on the essential elements, which we will divide into two groups where we have micronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are taken up by the plants in large quantities compared to micronutrients, where we only need just traces of these elements to cause probably biochemical reactions in the plants, resulting in plant growth or fruit formation. Now, I just want to give you the characteristics or the properties of what we describe as essential minerals or nutrients. There are three things which we consider. Remember, we've got too many of these elements, but if we are going to classify one element as essential, it has to satisfy three things. Number one, a plant must not be able to complete its life cycle without that mineral or nutrient. So if that element is such a way that its absence may stop the plant from completing its life cycle, therefore that element is essential. Because there are those elements, even if it is absent from the plant will always complete its life cycle. But there are those, if they are not in the plant will never complete its life cycle. The second condition is that the function of a particular nutrient or a mineral is not replaceable. It's like a wife, you can't replace a wife. So it's a very important element. You cannot replace it. The third issue is that the element must be directly involved in a plant's metabolism as a component of an essential plant constituent. For example, an enzyme which is required in a distinct metabolic step. So what we call an essential nutrient or mineral should satisfy those three things. So elements that are replaceable are not essential, but are said probably to be beneficial. Now, starting with the macronutrients or elements, these are the essential elements. Number one, we've got hydrogen, which can be obtained from water. We have got carbon. We have got oxygen, which can be obtained from the atmosphere. Carbon can also be derived from carbon dioxide. So the availability of the first three may not necessarily be limited because they are available. But starting with nitrogen, this can be, this can be limited, and this is why we sometimes apply fertilizers. So nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and sulfur. These are basically the important macronutrients. On the other hand, we do have micronutrients. I will discuss these later on, these micronutrients. But anyway, we need to know that chlorine is one of them, iron, boron, manganese, nickel, and molybdenum. So these are the essential micronutrients. So the macronutrients in table 1 and the micronutrients in table 2 are very important for the plant growth. Table 3 has got what we call beneficiary nutrients. I mean, the plant can do without these. For example, sodium, silicon, cobalt, iodine, and vanadium. So we are not going to spend too much time on these ones. But we will focus more on the table 1, starting from nitrogen, ending up with the sulfur. And then on table 2, we will talk about these micronutrients. Now, I just want to highlight some of the mechanisms which are used by plants to get these nutrients from the soil. The plants could use diffusion, which I think by now you know what it means. It can operate because of concentration gradients, where you have the nutrients moving from high concentration, which is outside the roots in the soil, going into the roots where we have probably a lower concentration of that nutrient. So there could be diffusion, or there could be simply mass flow. In mass flow, as water moves inside the root system, due to differences in water potential, it may carry with it dissolved the nutrients and deposit them inside the plant. This is one way of moving nutrients into the plant, and we call this mass flow. Now, there's also a situation where you have active transport, where let's suppose the concentration in the soil is higher than that in the, it's lower than that in the roots. The plant must have a mechanism of using energy to pump those nutrients into the roots. They use what is known as carrier-mediated transport, which involves the use of energy in the form of ATP. For your information, you just need to know that there are certain proteins or pumps which can transfer nutrients into the roots, and they require energy in the form of ATP. And we call these carrier-mediated, we call this process carrier-mediated transport. There's also a special diffusion, which is known as cation diffusion. Now, this is a result of negative and the positive regions, which can create electrochemical potential gradients, which can result in the movement of cations from the soil into the root system. So there could be a negative charge in the cell than outside it, and this can cause a movement of nutrients into the cells of the roots. It's a special diffusion known as cation diffusion. So we now want to move on to the macronutrients themselves. We now have an idea of how they can actually be transferred from the soil into the roots of the plants. Things like diffusion, mass flow, use of the carrier-aided transfers, special cation diffusion, so things like that, which can actually mobilize nutrients so that they are transferred into the plant. So micronutrients, what are they? These are the nutrients which are required in large amounts and are absorbed from the soils, probably using some of those 4 methods to enter the plants. The first nutrient which we are going to talk about is nitrogen. In fact, most farmers are quite aware of nitrogen deficiency. No wonder why they have to buy some fertilizers, especially ammonium nitrate these days, for top dressing. The basic element they are putting into the soil is nitrogen, which is not sufficient to maintain high yields. Naturally, nitrogen is in the atmosphere, about 78% of it is present. But that cannot be utilized by the plant in the form it is. It has to be converted to nitrates. Now, in the environment, nitrogen can be converted to nitrates or ammonium forms using bacteria, which could be in association with the leguminous plants. You could have heard about nitrogen fixation by legumes. They convert atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates, which become then available to the plants. Now, nitrogen can be available over a wide range of pH. You have just a diagram showing how nitrogen can be obtained from plants or trees which may decompose, or from the atmosphere, and it can be added into the soil. But farmers can directly put artificial nitrogen via ammonium nitrates as top dressing. So what is the importance of nitrogen or its function? You may be interested to know that nitrogen is part of every amino acid and therefore every protein. You know, living things require amino acids and the protein, and the basic part of the structure is nitrogen. Here I've just displayed several amino acids just to emphasize the importance of nitrogen. It's not for you to memorize all these chemical structures, but to appreciate where you can find nitrogen in various amino acids and the proteins. So what are the functions of nitrogen? Basically, enzymes, contain nitrogen. And these enzymes regulate metabolic processes. These are basically proteins, and nitrogen is part of their structure. Proteins are also used to build cells, organelles, and the cytoplasm, and nitrogen is part of their component. Now, nitrogen can also stimulate the increase in proteins in fruits and grains, and this can help utilization of other nutrients such as phosphorus and potassium. I mean, we are now aware that nitrogen can cause plant growth. It is also interesting to note that nitrogen is a constituent of porphyrin structures. For example, leg hemoglobin, which I think is found in leguminous plants, chlorophyll, and the cytochrome enzyme systems. Cytochrome enzyme systems, probably later on in the future, actually, we may talk about how they can how they can be involved in pesticide detoxification in other causes. We may talk a lot of cytochrome enzymes. Now, some of these may be, especially leg hemoglobin is important for nitrogen fixation. Chlorophyll is important for photosynthesis, and the cytochrome could be important for respiration. And these are the structures. This is the structure of the leg hemoglobin. And at the center of the molecule, we find, at some parts of the, of course, we find the iron, but in other parts we find the nitrogen. Also, nitrogen is found in the cytochrome. It is also found in chlorophyll. Of course, we are not supposed to memorize these complex structures, but only to remember that nitrogen is part of these important substances. You could have done something on DNA. Nitrogen is also a constituent of DNA and RNA. DNA, it is life itself. We talk of nitrogen bases, pyrimidines, and so forth. This is where you can find nitrogen. So nitrogen means life to the plants and to us as well. Now, nitrogen deficiency symptoms. Normally, plants turn yellow. This is a highly mobile nutrient, and older leaves usually display the symptoms of yellow color. This is caused by chlorosis and the firing of lower leaves. By firing of lower leaves, we mean leaf death. So leaves may become chlorotic or yellow, but the yellow color is a characteristic of nitrogen deficient symptoms on plants. In fact, most farmers know this, that if you are having yellow plants, it means you require top dressing. It can delay senescence. So we may have the green color being maintained for a long time, especially in maize. In cotton, this may not be acceptable. Even in maize, it can cause lodging. In cotton, it can cause rank growth. Now, what may happen is that most of the dry matter will go into the stem and the leaves at the expense of formation of seed. So this could be the effect of too much nitrogen in cotton. A lot of nitrogen can also create nitrites in the plant tissue, and nitrites are harmful to animals as well as humans who eat these plants which have had excessive nitrogen. So this is it about nitrogen. We move on to the element phosphorus. Phosphorus is also important. You might have seen on some fertilizer bags written NPK, meaning nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So phosphorus is one of the important nutrients. Now, phosphorus cannot be absorbed by the plant in its elemental form, but it's absorbed as an orthophosphate from the soil. Its uptake is mostly affected by the pH environment in the soil. For example, if we have got low soil pH, as indicated by this graph on our right, at low soil pH, there's very little phosphorus availability, but at neutral, probably after liming our soils, phosphorus becomes available. But too much of alkalinity may depress phosphorus uptake. Now, it is important for you to note that phosphorus is part of the phospholipids. This is a structure where you have this head representing phosphorus and this elongated part representing the fatty acid. So you've got the fatty acid joined to the phosphate group. It forms this cell membrane. This is the structure of the cell membrane. But what is basically important is to note that phosphorus is part of the cell membranes. And we know cell membranes have got vital functions in plant cells. It is also important, just like nitrogen, phosphorus is also part of DNA, which is life itself, and the RNA. So these elements are very important especially when we talk of DNA and the RNA. The other function is that we may have what are known as this lecture. So sorry for this disturbance. Now we have what are known as Phi Phytates. These actually are storage forms of phosphorus. And if the plants need phosphorus, it may have to use the phytase enzyme so that phosphates can be released. Probably this can happen during germination, because normally the phytates are stored in the seed. So during the germination process, phosphorus could be released together with calcium, magnesium, and the potassium for growth. So phosphorus will be required during the germination process. Now, the overall role of P in the plant. It encourages root development. It also encourages rapid growth. It can speed up maturity of plants and stimulates flowering or blooming. Now, by promoting early cell development, it helps the plant to build resistance to diseases. So phosphorus can help plant to resist the plants to resist diseases. Now, phosphorus is highly mobile. Let us look at the deficiency symptoms. If a phosphorus deficient plant is present, it is characterized by purplish leaves. And these purplish leaves are a result of what are known as anthocyanins, which accumulate in the plants in the absence of phosphorus. Normally, they give a purplish color. Sometimes it's reddish or blue. But the deficient symptoms gives these purplish colors. And they can also be retarded growth. Now, the deficient symptoms is that plants are slow to develop. These are probably common symptoms across all nutrients. Flowering may be delayed. There could be poor root development. It can increase susceptibility of plants infection due to diseases. Sometimes plants show the dark green colored leaves. And this color is beyond what is normal. And it could be a deficient symptom for this phosphorus. but that cannot be easy to recognize. The other thing is that yields are reduced, even with nitrogen. If it is absent, yields can also be reduced. Now, phosphorus can cause some toxicity, especially in soils with pH less than 5.5. It can affect the uptake of iron, zinc, and copper, which are microelements. The next is potassium. Now, potassium uptake is highly selective and coupled with the expenditure of metabolic energy. So you require ATP, or you may require a carrier-aided transport system so that potassium can enter the roots. Diffusion and mass action may not be important. This is an abundant cation in the cytoplasm and highly mobile in the plant. It is found in its ionic form, K+, in the soil solution, and is also in the form that the plant can absorb. Now, changes of pH do not affect availability of potassium to the plant. Now, potassium also acts as an activator of certain enzymes. So it is a very important element. It is also required for root development. It participates in the organic salt transport and storage. One of the functions which we have already discussed when we were talking about transpiration is that potassium is involved in the opening and the closing of the stomata by regulating trigger pressure of the gut cells. We now know that story. Now, potassium is also involved in the translocation of magnesium and the carbohydrates through the phloem. It is also involved in protein synthesis. Now, it is also involved in a process known as the translation process, including the binding of tRNA to the ribosomes, probably during protein synthesis. You may probably have more information on it. Potassium deficient symptoms induces accumulation of soluble N compounds, amino acids, amides, and nitrates as a result of impairment of protein synthesis. Now, the deficient symptoms of potassium. Now, on leaf edges, it can cause a chlorosis. It's also highly mobile, and the symptoms can be seen on older leaves. Lack of potassium causes growth retardation. it is important to note that potassium is important for lignification of vascular bundles. Its absence can cause lodging. Now, it's also important in regulating effects of moisture stress or preventing effects of moisture stress by regulating the closure and opening of the stomata so that the plant can survive dry conditions. It is also involved with the enzyme reactions. And if it is absent, then the enzymes may lead to poor growth. There could be toxicity symptoms. Anyway, potassium is not usually absorbed in excessive amounts. But high potassium may cause calcium, magnesium, and perhaps manganese, zinc, and iron deficiencies. So its presence in high amounts could trigger deficiency symptoms for other nutrients. But I must say that the Zimbabwean soils seem to have high potassium. I know our fertilizers contain potassium, but it may be rare for our plants to get potassium deficiency symptoms. We seem to have a lot of it in our soils. But as a precautionary move, we need to add potassium so that we prevent its deficiency in future. Calcium. Now, this element is found in its ionic form in the soil as Ca++ in the solution. This is very sensitive to soil pH. So under acid conditions, if you check this line here, there's very little which is available. Probably just like phosphorus and to a certain extent potassium, magnesium. Now, in the cell, calcium can combine with bicarbonate to form the base calcium bicarbonate that is an effective neutralizing agent for acids formed during cellular metabolism. So it can actually control pH within the plant, which tends to be acidic. Calcium is also an activator of enzymes, amylase and ATPase. So let us look at the role of calcium in plants. It can form a cementing or cross-linking within plant cell walls. It can strengthen the cell walls or give cell wall stabilization. It also gives the cell membrane integrity. It can also regulate membrane permeability. These are some of the deficient symptoms if our soils lack calcium. There's what is called flower end rot in tomatoes. It may look like a disease caused by fungus, but this could be calcium. It can cause tip burn in lettuce. It can cause black heart of celery, bitter pit in apples, which are, there are some apples with these spots. It could be a result of calcium deficiency. It can also cause senescence. We know in groundnuts, if we want a good seed, or avoid empty pods, calcium is usually applied. So to facilitate grain feeding of these pods. Now, toxicity symptoms, they are non-consistent. However, any symptoms are usually associated with the high carbonate levels, but it doesn't usually cause toxicity. Magnesium. Now, magnesium is obtained as Mg++ in the ionic form. This is the form which the plant can use. Now, the rate of uptake is strongly depressed by the presence of potassium, ammonium, calcium, manganese, and the low pH. But especially low pH, it can actually depress the uptake of magnesium in plants. So what is the importance of magnesium? It is it's vital for the chlorophyll. It forms part of the molecule of chlorophyll. We know chlorophyll is essential for photosynthesis. So without magnesium, I don't think the plant will grow. Now, magnesium can also combine with ATP and ADP as a metal activator for the enzymes that use these two compounds when they change from one form into the other form. Apart from that, magnesium also activates enzymes needed in photosynthesis, respiration, and formation of DNA and RNA. It is also required in protein synthesis, where magnesium aggregates ribosomes suitable for activating RNA polymerase and hence the formation of RNA. So it is important for RNA formation. So RNA synthesis can decline rapidly in the absence of magnesium. But if magnesium is added, you can reverse these effects easily. So this element is easily mobile. You can see the deficiency effects on the lower parts of the plant in the form of intervenular chlorosis, yellow to white color between the veins. Although the veins will be green, the other parts of the leaves are either yellow or white. Probably this is how you can distinguish it from nitrogen deficiency, where the whole leaf can have chlorosis or yellow, but with magnesium, some parts of the leaf become yellow, but the veins maintain their greenness. Finally, there could be necrosis and the death of the leaves. Leaves tend to easily break. We call this brittle, and they can curl upward. The absence of magnesium could cause reduction in enzyme activity. It can reduce photosynthesis and respiration, and I think this has a big impact on the growth of the plant. Now, storage of magnesium in forage grasses can cause grass tetany in animals which eat this grass. Now, sulfur. Now, sulfur is a divalent anion. I mean, it is sulfur is actually taken as a sulfate, which is a divalent anion. It can be absorbed via the roots and transported in the xylem. And this element doesn't appear to be affected by pH. So what are the functions of sulfur? There are some amino acids, special amino acids, where sulfur is a constituent. For example, cysteine and methionine. These are amino acids which contain sulfur. Now, sulfur is part of the bond, or we have what are known as sulfur bridges, but I think what is important is that cysteine and methionine contain sulfur. And these proteins are critical to all metabolic processes of the plant. So what is important is to remember that cysteine and methionine contain sulfur, and these are important amino acids. Another interesting information is that sulfur could be part of the cell membrane. If you have eaten garlic or onion, there's a typical odor which is caused by sulfur. Anyway, when you have eaten garlic, you know what it means, or onion. Sulfur gives a characteristic odor. This element is moderately mobile, so the symptoms can be seen on young parts of the plant. Probably this may not be clear on this one. So sulfur can be critical on protein synthesis. Its absence means that there's a reduction in protein synthesis. And this can also affect chlorophyll. So the middle or younger leaves, they can show chlorosis or yellowing, as opposed to nitrogen, where we see yellowing probably on large leaves. But if you start seeing yellowing on young leaves, it could be sulfur deficiency. Stems and roots may have small diameters, but this may not be, you may not get this, effect easily. It's not easy to distinguish whether the diameter is reduced or not. But the stems can easily break in the absence of sulfur, which we call brittleness. So here are the toxicity symptoms. If you have intraveinal chlorosis or a burning of the leaves, it could be toxicity symptoms or excessive sulfur effects. So on the major elements, this is it. I will have to stop here as far as macro elements are concerned. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, I have now finished the part of on the macro elements.
All right.
I don't want to move to micronutrients now because it will be too much.
Okay,
So, can we stop here for micronutrients?
Yeah.
So that you can focus probably tonight on the micronutrients. Then tomorrow we will pick on with the micronutrients.
Okay.
With the fresh mind.
Yeah.
The reason why I've divided this into two parts is that we have too many of these elements. There are 17. So I can't bombard your heads with 17 elements at the same time. I have given you half of them so that you deal with micronutrients. So what time can we meet tomorrow?
Exactly 2.
Exactly 2. So that we will be talking about micronutrients. Any questions? For micronutrients and macronutrients, we just have to know what they do. But at least you have some idea about nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium. So let's get on tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Otherwise, if I start on the micronutrients, it may become too much for today. You need to focus on the macronutrients. I have already posted some PowerPoints about the two issues. Okay, so I will see you tomorrow. 2 o'clock. Yes.
Esama posta mu group makanzi micro elements. Esama posta ma file akanzi micro elements.
Have you read them?
Asana mafurawo.
Yeah, avhure. So when you have opened them, you will give me the feedback.
Document one ndatozviona munenge maposta document one rakafana.
Bani. Kamafure izvi. Akafanana.
Yeah, akafanana.
Eh.
Just open them and give me the feedback.
Akafanana sei.
Okay, so let me post the relevant ones.
Okay.
So what we have is the macro.
Micro.
Eh?
Micro. Mune micro.
Okay, I will check in the post again. So see you tomorrow.
Okay, bless the day.
Okay.